Hi there, Sam Schiffman here with another episode of What's on My Mind. Today I'm going to talk about why I think Agentic is perfect for healthcare. Um, I mean, why would we start in healthcare? Isn't healthcare one of the most complicated and critical and risky places to start? And the answer is yes, but not to bury the lead. I think that complexity is exactly why we should start with agentic there. And I'm going to explain that. Obviously, I mean, you'd have to be blind to not see that agentic is happening all over across many different industries. But I think it'll have particular impact in healthcare. And let's talk about why. Okay. So when I think about healthcare, I think that there are really four primary problems that I think are challenges that I think are facing healthcare today. One is obviously labor shortages, right? We are losing doctors and nurses by the droves, right? They're leaving healthcare either because of burnout, which because of a number of different issues, or actually due to retirement, which we'll talk about, and other reasons. And so we have labor shortages. At the same time, we're having an aging population, right? We know that at least in the developed world, that the population as the baby boomers have kind of aged into the retirement age, but even not just the baby boomers in the U.S., but around the world, right? We know that Japan already has to deal with the fact that that they have way more people over 65 than they've ever had before, and the Census Bureau tells us that in the U.S. we will have more people over 65 than under 18 for the first time in the very near future, right? In the U.S. So we have an aging population, which is partially leading to that labor shortage because many of those people are retiring. Also, aging people. Well, one, they have longer health records, right? They have more complexity in their health care needs. They also generally see more specialists and have more issues, right? Just in general. So they need more healthcare. So the aging population is causing a demand at the same time, an increase in demand at the same time we're seeing a shortage in labor, right? But those are only two of the four things that are happening. One of the other things is explosion in information, right? This is happening all over, right? I mean, we see that technology is causing an exploding in information, but it's particularly true in healthcare. Dr. Ryan Vega, who I work with, was just telling me that he's was at the American College of Physicians conference and has just been wowed by the sheer volume of information that has come out recently that he was unaware of, and how much there is to learn, right? So we have this explosion in knowledge in medicine, knowledge in the world, that is staggering and hard to get our heads around. I read once a statistic that said that your average physician will read 6% of the literature in their specialty, in their entire lifetime, right? There's just no way that anybody can keep up with all of that data, right? And at the same time that all of these three things are happening, we also have a evolution of the problems. So we've gotten pretty good at acute care, right? Somebody walks in with a broken bone or with an infection or something like that, right? We're pretty good at what we need to do, how we're going to treat them, how to get them healthy, right? However, in today's world, what's much more likely to kill you is something like diabetes, something like heart disease, something like cancer, or something like complications from Alzheimer's or mental decline, right? Those are the things which we're facing today. And those problems are chronic in nature. And often by the time they're diagnosed, it's too late, right? And even if it isn't too late, what they require as treatment are totally different. They require modifications in people's behavior over time and continuous feedback in order to address those new sort of chronic issues. And these new sort of chronic issues are more prevalent in our aging population, right? Because they're living longer, they're experiencing more cancer, they're experiencing more Alzheimer's. All of these problems are problems of age, right? Also, this combines with the labor shortage because, right, I talked about part of the labor shortage comes from people retiring, but part of the labor shortage also comes from the burnout, which comes from the explosion of information that clinicians are expected to be able to keep a hold of and stay on top of, and also the burnout comes from the fact that it's really hard to treat these kinds of problems in a way that I would say clinicians are not trained to do, right? That's not what they've been trained to do. They've been trained to help us with those acute issues, right? So these four problems are really building on top of each other and combining to cause real problems in healthcare, right? So traditional solution for this, I've actually talked about it in other videos, would be automation, right? You have a problem with a supply and demand, right? So we have an increasing demand, we have decreasing supply. The classic solution to that is to bring in automation or technology to help solve it. That runs into a wall in healthcare. And I actually have talked about this in another video, but what is that wall? Well, that wall has to do with complexity, right? Right? There are over 1 trillion cells in the human body, right? Alone, that's one human body. I believe I saw that there were maybe a couple billion credit card transactions last year in the U.S. Okay, order of magnitude different, right? One human, trillion cells. All of the U.S. economy, a couple billion credit card transactions. And a credit card transaction is actually much simpler, right, than a cell, even a single cell, right? So I think the complexity that you run into in healthcare, I always shy away from saying that healthcare is a special animal compared to other domains, but it is true. It's undeniably true that there's a complexity there that comes in from the fact that every patient is slightly different, right? Every every situation in healthcare is slightly different, and you can't apply the same sort of classical automation techniques on top of that. Why? Because, well, you spend, classical uh, automation means that you do process engineering, right? And what you do is you bring in a bunch of experts. They sit down with the people who are subject matter experts and the people who are process managed experts. They get together, they talk about the process, they map it all out, they figure out what pieces could be automated, they put together that automation, they implement it. That takes months and thousands, at least thousands, maybe millions of dollars to do that, right? That they can only map out a one case or a set of cases there. They can't map out what they can't see, and they can't map out the complexity, all the complexities, right? It's just not possible. And then by the time they get that implemented, not only is it fragile because it can't respond to all the variability that it's going to see in the wild, it's also probably out of date because of that explosion of information, right? Healthcare is changing radically. We're discovering new things all the time. There's no way that any codified process can keep up with that, right? A lot of people have talked about bringing what we call clinical practice guidelines into computable form so that they can keep up, which I think is a very valiant thing, and I think that that's important. But I don't think that that's truly what's going to address the problem at this point. I think it's going to be a piece of it, but it's not going to fully address the problem. So all of this is to say that we have all of this complexity. We also have all of this need. And it reminds me of something, which is that saying that necessity is the mother of invention, right? Um, uh, you know, um, that's a super important concept too, and kind of the crux of my argument, right? I think in a couple of videos ago, I talked about why I've become convinced that agentic is the path forward in computing, because it's going to allow us to build adaptable computers. We're going to be able to not just have the computer be able to deal with what the programmer could envision ahead of time. The computer is going to be able to adjust to new and unique situations. The thing is, and while we do see agentic coming in all kinds of interesting ways across multiple different industries, I think the thing is that, in the end, when you take a look at something like accounting, for example, the general ledger has been understood for thousands of years, right? Accounting is something where you can say, this is how, when I debit some money from my bank account, it gets debited from my bank account and I pay somebody over here, right? It gets double entered in the ledgers and everybody can reconcile it later and everybody's good, right? These are complex systems, but not anywhere near as complex as the human body, right? Any one of those transactions. So while I think you could apply agentic systems in those situations, they're not going to be pushed to truly do what they can do, right? There is no necessity to push them super hard in order to get what we truly could realize out of them, and what I would argue we really need out of them. So that's why I come back to healthcare, right? There is this complexity there that is incredibly complex system. It's an incredibly fragile system and an incredibly broken system at this point, right? It's not that healthcare is going to be in crisis. Healthcare is in crisis already, and it's not just in the U.S. It's around the world, right? It's something we have to address, and what I think is we have to address it with a totally new technology. In that in this agentic world, we can actually build adaptive workflows and adaptive systems that can actually be useful. Now, you should come back at me. You really should come back at me and say, well, what about the fact that we have people's lives at stake in healthcare? It is an incredible level of risk, and I do think that that's important to remember, right? It is very important to remember that there is risk in healthcare. So I'm not a proponent of, I'm not a proponent of let's turn agentic systems into doctors tomorrow, right? Or replace doctors or nurses or anybody with agentic systems tomorrow. I don't actually think that that's the right approach to the problem. What I think is and this is part of where trying to use agentic systems in the way that I see people using them today, which is to put them at the edges where they're using them for that last little bit of delivery, to frame the message. I mean, it's nice to make healthcare a little bit more human readable and easier for people to understand. But there's risk there. There's incredible risk there, right? There are many places in healthcare where there isn't nearly as much risk. And there's also places in healthcare where there's where we can keep humans in the loop in appropriate ways. So, well, what's an example? I mean, it sounds trivial, but bed management in a hospital, right? You have, say we have a hospital that has, an ER, right? And maybe it has some beds in it, right? And a waiting room, and a patient comes in, right? So the patient comes in, they're going to go into a bed. They might need to go to the OR. They might need to get admitted to the inpatient. They might be able to go home, right? Doctor's going to see them. They're going to occupy a bed here for a little while. Doctor's going to see them. They're going to order some labs. So there's going to be a bunch of workflow that happens as they order those labs, and they maybe do a consult. Maybe they do some treatment, something like that. So you've got, labs and consults and procedures going on, right? Got all this stuff going on. Then the doctor decides, yes, this patient needs to go to the OR for surgery for some reason. They're going to go to the OR for surgery. That's going to be another set of these things going on, right? Then they're going to go here for some period of time. Maybe they go to the inpatient, maybe they don't. Maybe they're able to go home, right? This is what I'm drawing here is like a very simplified version of what could happen with a patient, right? So they go to the inpatient. That's going to be another set of labs and consults and procedures as they get better, and then eventually they're going to get discharged to go home, right? When they get discharged to go home, transport needs to make sure, transport actually needs to be involved in moving them all around, but the transport needs to get engaged in order to get them to the curbside, but then also they need to make sure that they have a ride and that they're going to get home and that ride is going to arrive at a reasonable time for when transport's going to get them there. And then you got to get the bed clean. So when they left this bed, they got to get that bed clean. When they left the OR had to get clean. When they left the inpatient, that needs to get cleaned. all of that. And if your intake, you also have patients coming in from other places. All of these are very, very complicated workflows, which seem trivial when you think about them, but as you start to dive into them, they get very complicated. And so these are a perfect example of where we could start to apply agentic systems that could adapt to what's going on in a way that systems haven't been able to in the past, and actually start to help solve some of these problems, which right now take a lot of time from nurses and caseworkers going through and and calling people on the phone and saying, "Hey, is there a bed available in inpatient? I've got this patient coming out of the OR. I need to get them in someplace," and you know, calling to make sure that the right people are going to be in the OR, calling to make sure that there's going to be a ride for that person, right? These are all kinds of things which I do think agentic systems could really help with, and help with today, and do it in a way that would be adaptive, and also have the complexity to force us to actually push the technology to where we really need it to be, to solve the kind of problems that we need to have solved and we want to have solved, right? So just to reiterate, I think the reason why we should be looking at agentic systems for healthcare is because of the complexity and challenges in healthcare. Both it's incredibly needed, and it will also apply the pressure and provide the environment where these systems can actually show the potential that they have. So thank you. If you made it this far through the video, I appreciate a like. I appreciate to continue the conversation with comments, and also obviously you can subscribe to my channel and watch some of the other videos in this series or other videos that I have out there, and have a great rest of your day.